The house was perfect. A charming old Victorian in a quiet town, surrounded by rolling fields and an ancient forest. Emma and her husband Jack had been looking for a peaceful retreat from city life, and this house was everything they'd hoped for. The day they moved in, they discovered something unusual in the backyard: a well. It was covered with a weathered stone lid, the kind you only see in old photographs or fairy tales. Jack was fascinated by it, while Emma felt uneasy from the start. It sat in the middle of the yard like a forgotten relic, shrouded in moss and vines. The previous owners had said nothing about it. "Let's take a look," Jack suggested one evening, a few weeks after they had settled in. Emma hesitated. "I don't know. It gives me the creeps." "Come on, it's just an old well," Jack said with a laugh. "What's the worst that could happen?" Against her better judgment, Emma helped him remove the heavy stone lid. As it slid away, they peered down into the darkness. The air that rose from the well was cold, far colder than it should have been on a warm summer night. The smell of damp earth and something else, something foul, wafted up. Jack shone his flashlight down the well. The beam barely reached the bottom. "Looks pretty deep," he said, his voice echoing in the stone chamber. "Let's put the lid back on," Emma urged, her skin crawling. But Jack was already lowering a rope tied to a bucket he found in the shed. He was eager to see what lay at the bottom. Might as well see if there's anything down there. The bucket disappeared into the darkness. They waited in silence, the only sound the faint wind rustling through the trees. When Jack finally pulled the bucket up, it was empty, save for a thick black sludge at the bottom. He stared at it, confused. "That's weird," he muttered. "Maybe it's just old rainwater." Emma took a step back, her unease deepening. "Please, let's just leave it alone." Jack agreed, but something had changed in him after that night. He started spending more time by the well, staring into it for long stretches, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. At night, Emma would wake up to find him standing at the window, looking out at the well, his face pale in the moonlight. One evening after dinner, Jack suggested they try again to find out what was at the bottom. Emma refused. "Something's not right with that well," she said, her voice shaking. "I've had nightmares ever since we opened it. We shouldn't mess with it." Jack ignored her concerns. He became obsessed, researching old legends about cursed wells and spirits trapped in the earth. He spent hours online and in the local library, searching for answers. The more he read, the more he believed the well held something ancient and powerful. One night, Jack didn't come to bed. Emma found him outside by the well, sitting on the edge, staring down into it. His eyes were vacant, as though he were in a trance. "Jack!" she shouted, running toward him. "What are you doing?" He didn't respond, his gaze locked on the darkness below. "Jack!" She grabbed his arm, pulling him away from the edge. He snapped out of his daze, blinking in confusion. I thought I heard something," he whispered. "Voices. They were calling me." "There's nothing down there but dirt and old water," Emma said, her voice trembling. "You're scaring me. Please, we need to leave it alone." Reluctantly, Jack agreed to stay away from the well. For a few days, things seemed to return to normal. But Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them, something that had been disturbed when they opened the well. One stormy night, as lightning cracked across the sky, Emma woke to find Jack's side of the bed empty. Her heart raced. She ran to the window, dreading what she might see. He was outside again. This time, the stone lid had been pushed aside completely, and Jack was lowering himself into the well. "No!" Emma screamed, rushing downstairs and out into the rain-soaked yard. She reached the well just as Jack disappeared into the darkness below. Without thinking, she grabbed the rope he had tied to a nearby tree and began pulling. But the rope went slack, and no matter how hard she tugged, there was no sign of Jack. "Jack!" She screamed into the well, her voice echoing off the stone walls. The only response was a low, guttural whisper rising from the depths, like a chorus of voices speaking at once. They were too faint to understand, but the malevolence in their tone was unmistakable. Emma staggered back, her hands shaking. She stumbled into the house, frantically searching for her phone to call for help. But when she picked it up, there was no signal, just static. She stood frozen, clutching the phone as the whispers grew louder, filling the house. The walls seemed to close in on her, the air thick with dread. The lights flickered, and the shadows in the corners of the room stretched and twisted. Suddenly, the door creaked open, and she saw Jack standing in the doorway, soaked from the rain. Relief washed over her. "Jack," she cried, rushing toward him. "I thought you..." But as she got closer, she realized something was wrong. Jack's eyes were dark, lifeless, his skin pale and waxy. He stared at her with a vacant expression, and when he spoke, his voice was not his own. "They want you too." Emma stumbled back, horrified. The whispers from the well echoed in his voice, and as he stepped toward her, his movements were unnatural, jerky, like a puppet on strings. She fled the house, running through the rain-soaked yard toward the car, but the whispers followed her, growing louder with every step. The ground beneath her feet felt soft, like it was pulling her down. Just as she reached the car, she glanced back at the well. It was bubbling, the black sludge spilling over the edge, rising like a tide of darkness. And from that darkness, shapes began to emerge, twisted, shadowy figures with hollow eyes, climbing out of the well and reaching for her. Emma screamed, scrambling into the car and locking the doors. But as she fumbled with the keys, the figures surrounded the car, their faces pressed against the windows, whispering her name in a chorus of malevolent voices. The last thing she saw before the world went black was Jack standing in the middle of the yard, watching her with those hollow eyes, a twisted smile on his face. The well had claimed them both,